it's actually a lot of excitement and fun, and there are thousands of people milling about, eating, buying books, having fun, conversations, the whole lot. So it's a real pity you couldn't be here, but perhaps another time. We are quite a fun country, and it's safe. Everybody, is it safe? Yes, yes. Yeah. Contrary to popular belief. And we're really good hosts. So we would take excellent care of you. So can we start? Are we ready? Okay, thank you. So I will confess I've not read the whole book, but I have read some of it, and I've gone through it, and I got pretty scared at the thought of AI and what AI means, etc. And I think in your, right in the opening, you talk about that and how it scared you. And so if the whole concept of AI was scary to you to start with, what has changed? Why are you not afraid of it anymore?
Well, first of all, can I say thank you for inviting me to your festival, and I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but it's a privilege even to be communicating in this way. And isn't it amazing that the technology allows us to do this? So as for my book, just a little bit of background which might help. I am half a lawyer and half an AI person, and I wrote my PhD at Oxford University, in the 1980s on AI and law. So I've divided my life between technology and law. And in all, I've been involved with AI for about 45 years. And we've seen far more happen in the last 5 than in the previous 40. And I was getting a little frustrated by the commentary and the books that were emerging on AI, which seemed to me to be very much geared towards the technology. Whereas my interest is very much on the impact. What does this technology mean for our children? What does it mean for our jobs? What does it mean for our communities? And so what I thought I would do, and for the first time ever, I thought I'd write a book for the general reader. And it's not a book anything really to do with law. This is a book about AI. This is me trying to explain what AI is all about. And as I wrote the book, the context is that I had for many years been a very big fan of AI, and I continue to be that. I can see that our global health challenges, our global justice challenges, our global climate challenges, our educational challenges, I can see how AI will actually address and overcome many of these global difficulties. But at the same time, there are a mountain range of risks. And these risks might be to the worker, because so much work will be taken on by AI. These risks might be from bad actors weaponizing the technology. These risks might be that we're allowing huge wealth and capital and processing power and data to be concentrated on a very small number of organizations. And so AI is a very strange phenomenon. I say that saving AI, or saving humanity with and from AI, is the defining challenge of our era. Now, you asked me, or you gave the sense that I'd suddenly become negative. I've not. I'm both optimistic and pessimistic, and this is a message. It's not like a football team. You don't need to support it or not support it. I think all of us have to have a more rational debate about a technology that could bring phenomenal benefits and a technology that could bring phenomenal dangers. So at the one time, I'm both excited and terrified by the technology.
I think most people are, they look at this and they feel, okay, this is very exciting. There's so much we can do with it. We can even become lazy with it, get it to do everything for us. And I think the minute you start thinking that way, then that's when it really starts to scare you, because if it can do everything for you, will it take over you?
Well, in some ways, I think as it does more and more, and can undertake more and more tasks that we used to think only humans could undertake, the biggest question that arises is, what are humans for? If we can get to the stage where AI systems are very, very advanced, they will undertake much of the work that we used to do. So it causes us to ask some very fundamental questions about ourselves. But I did want to say at the outset that the future is not clear. the AI community, AI experts disagree on how capable these systems will become. And as you've read, I have got 6 different hypotheses. There's 6 different views about the impact of AI. And if you just give me a couple of minutes to summarize these, that might help. So the first view is it's all hype, that these systems make mistakes, they're based on data that's unreliable and biased, and that the bubble will soon burst because these systems are too expensive to build and run. The business case will fail. The second hypothesis, which I call the Gen AI hypothesis, that's based on generative AI like ChatGPT and such systems. These systems we're all already using today that generate words and music and videos and so forth. The second hypothesis is that these systems today are unreliable, but in a few years' time will be reliable, but AI will go no further than that. What we're seeing today is the limits of AI. The only change we'll see, these people say, is that the systems will become more reliable. The third hypothesis is called the AGI hypothesis, which stands for Artificial General Intelligence. And that's the idea that these systems will actually perform at the level of humans across the full range of our cognitive tasks. So that's to say they'll be able to do really just about anything we can do as professional workers, for example. And you might say, well, that's nonsense. And indeed, in 2022, before ChatGPT was launched, most people in the tech development world said that AGI was 20 to 40 years away. Today, most people are saying it's about 5 to 10 years away. And I want you to digest that because it's the biggest point I'll make today. Most of the big tech companies, most of the developers are anticipating within 5 to 10 years, we will have systems that perform at our level across the full range of our tasks. And that's only 3 hypotheses. The fourth hypothesis is that these systems will become far more capable than us. We'll have superintelligence, that these systems will be very much more capable than us. Then the fifth hypothesis is the singularity hypothesis, that we will begin to merge with these machines. And the sixth hypothesis is the AI evolution hypothesis, which basically says, in summary, that in due course, these systems will become so superior that they will replace us. So I'm sorry to spoil your conference or your meeting, but that's a rather depressing thought. The big thing we should be focusing on in government, for our children, in businesses, right across humanity and society, in my view, and it's the theme of the book, is what if AGI? What if these technologists are right, and within 5 to 10 years, we have systems that are performing at human level? That's the big question I think we need to ask and discuss.
So if the systems can perform at human level, it's almost like they're high-performing aliens because they're not human, right? So they're high-performing aliens. So how do we evaluate these? I mean, you know, how do we evaluate them and how are they evaluating us?
I think the analogy of aliens is really good, and a couple of leading AI people have talked about that. So one person said that, imagine if you knew within 5 to 10 years there were a fleet of spaceships about to land on Earth, bringing aliens that were as capable, or if not more capable than us. How would we prepare? Well, the answer is we'd be doing a lot of preparation, and the point is that with AI we're not doing much preparation at all. How we evaluate them and how they interact with and evaluate us are clear and very difficult questions. One of the problems is that these systems, we don't really understand how they work. I'm not saying we don't understand that we take huge amounts of data, we apply lots of processing power, and we use clever algorithms, and these systems perform at a high level. What I'm saying is that for any interaction with the system, if you said, write a short poem about the book festival, this system would generate a poem. If you try to understand how it did that, these systems they're like a black box. And I know a lot of people call for transparency, but to some extent that's misunderstanding how the systems work. So the first thing to note is we can't really know, we can't get inside the brains, as it were. But also, we can't really get inside the brains of humans and one another. I don't know what's going on in your mind. You don't know what's going on in my mind. So we take for granted what it is the people, if you ask for an explanation, you imagine that explanation in some sense refers to a person's thinking, but it may or may not. So the first big point to make is that I don't think we will be able to evaluate these systems by diving deep into the technology. What I think we need to do is develop a whole bundle of tests, audits, ways of stress testing these systems so that before the very significant ones are made publicly available or supported by governments, they've been through a rigorous review, verification, validation process. Now, what these machines will think of us is an interesting question, because it does raise the question whether or not these machines are sentient or conscious in any way. And that's a thing I deal with in my book. My background's partly in philosophy, so that interests me. The question of the extent to which, as scientists would say, that consciousness might be an emergent property of complex systems. If systems are complicated enough, then some kind of consciousness arises. I'm not sure about that. And I'm also not sure, there's no reason if some kind of self-awareness arose within these machines, why it would be like our consciousness. It might be a different form of consciousness altogether. So the reality is we will be cohabiting on Earth with, as you put it, aliens whose inner workings we can't really comprehend and whose consciousness, if they have any, is probably quite unlike ours. Whether or not they will have an interest in us is also an interesting proposition. There's a man called Marvin Minsky, who was one of the founding fathers of AI, and he won the very prestigious Turing Prize in 1969. In the following year, in 1970, he was being interviewed for Life magazine, and he said something like this. He said, the next generation of systems will be so intelligent, we'll be lucky if they keep us around as household pets. And I used to think that was quite funny, but I'm not so sure now, to be honest.
Yes, you wrote that in your book.
Yes, that's right.
That was the bit that scared me. So you talked about stress testing systems, you've talked about self-awareness of systems. All that is something that human beings do. I mean, we undergo stress tests all the time. I mean, people go and get checkups and they do stress tests. And it's really a stress test of your system. And self-awareness, that's a human quality as well. So how will a machine get that? How will a machine get self-awareness unless it gets it from us? So should we be censoring what we're feeding into these machines? Should we try not to humanize them? Sorry.
Well, humanizing them is one thing. Evaluating them as though they were humans is another. So question one, do we want them to have human characteristics? But question two, should we be evaluating them in human terms? Because people often talk about these machines thinking or reasoning, but that's not what they're doing. They're human faculties, they're human facilities. Are we building them in our image, as it were? I think that we have to accept, certainly the current way we build these systems, is their behavior is based on oceans of data, of human language largely, and that language has been generated by us as human beings. So if their mannerisms, if their performance, if their behavior is human-like, it's simply reflecting the data upon which they rely. In the future, one can at least conceive that they might rely on, for example, what's known as synthetic data, that we create different bodies of data. Or rather than basing their performance on huge amounts of language, they might be based on, people call these world models, where the performance of the system is based on their observation of the external world. Because, let me give you an example, for example, in healthcare. Medical diagnostics is something good for us to think about. So if you've got a system that can undertake medical diagnostics that can be used by a person who's not a doctor, there's a bundle of issues immediately. How can the user be confident that the system's reliable? Who will be responsible if the system gives rise to advice or guidance that is wrong and gives rise to a problem? How do we develop and design these systems, and how do we test their performance? That's another set of thoughts that one might have. Do we want them to copy human doctors, or do we want them to be based on the science? And quite a lot of the work that's been done so far in AI over the last 75 years has been trying essentially, in one way or another, to reflect or embody the way humans solve problems. But it may well be that we'll find entirely different ways of designing these systems. When I was involved in developing systems in the 1980s, we used a technique called rule-based expert systems. And essentially what you did was you built a huge decision tree, a huge flowchart. So you took a complex area of medicine, and it was like a flowchart that allowed non-expert people to roam around. But the big point I want to make is we could not imagine in the 1980s that there might be another way, a different way of building AI systems. And today we have a different way. It's based on a whole bundle of different techniques and technologies. You'll have heard of neural networks and large language models and so forth. I don't worry too much about today's technologies, because in 10 years' time, I think we'll look back and think it's amazing we used to think that was the only way to build AI systems. And so we might have systems that aren't based on human language or human reasoning or a perception of human reasoning at all.
Right, but for example, you said building AI in our own image, where God created man in his own image, and look where that got us. We didn't really stick to the script, I guess. But that's the danger. Will AI stick to the script? That's a big problem. And the other thing is, I know that they're using AI now in Pakistan in hospitals to do medical diagnosis, and they're following the science. But that empathy and the kind of instinct of the doctor is always missing. So there needs to be someone, who will be the final arbiter, will look at all your results, etc., and then say, okay, this is the problem, and perhaps the machine got it wrong in some places and got it right in most.
Well, that's one view. I mean, the other view is that if these systems become as capable and more capable than humans, then we will no longer think that somehow we need human supervision, because these systems will be better than us. And you talk about empathy, and this is a lot of the challenge I make in the book, because I think the standard view is not unlike the view you've expressed. Hang on a second, we're humans, they're machines. We can reason, we can think, we're creative, we're empathetic, we can exercise judgment. Machines can do none of these things. Humans will always be needed. That's the standard view. And I challenge that view, because if you take something like healthcare, I think we're confusing ourselves. I think we're confusing how we deliver healthcare today with the outcomes that people want. And as I keep on saying, people don't want doctors, they want health. And if AI systems can deliver health in a way that's more convenient, less intrusive, less costly, quicker, then I don't think we'll say, no, we still want humans. The extreme example I give of this, if we found a cure for cancer, I don't think people would say, no, I want to not take the vaccine. I prefer to see an empathetic doctor. That just isn't the way we'd think. So our confusion when we're thinking about AI and humans is somehow that the human way is the only way, and that AI systems have to copy humans, and there'll be a poor imitation, and therefore will still be needed. But if you creep towards AGI or even better, then I'm not sure why we would want these systems in the loop at all. So if you take tax, for example, it's a different kind of example. In the United States, now more than 50% of people submit their tax returns without a human tax expert at all. To my knowledge, none of these people are complaining about the loss of social interaction with an empathetic tax advisor. They're just getting the job done. So we've got to be very
perhaps
careful.
they need a crooked tax advisor, a creative one.
Well, isn't that a great idea? You could have two systems. One that's
You've got to
legitimate
teach
one.
the system how to sort of game the system.
Well, I mean, you joke, and that is funny. I like that a lot. And you can imagine illegal tax avoidance, an illegal tax avoidance system. You absolutely could. But the less funny thing about that is we have to accept also that criminals are looking at this technology, and it's a phenomenal weapon and tool for them as well.
Right, absolutely. So when would human reasoning be required? I mean, what is it?
So that's the really interesting question.
Because you're a lawyer, I'm a lawyer sometimes, on a good day. But see, I was just thinking about this. I said, what if there's a life and death situation, you've got to, and all you have are precedents, laws that were written, with a specific philosophy, bent of mind, etc., etc. It may not be fair, it may not be lots of things. They may not be as evolved as we think they are. One
of the things I often say in law, and law to some extent is my first love, and I believe passionately in justice. But around the world, a lot of our justice systems are broken. I can't speak for your country, but in the UK...
Ours is completely broken.
Yeah, in the UK, our system is meant to be advanced, but the reality is almost no one can afford to pursue a dispute. The law itself is not understandable unless you're a lawyer. Lawyers are far too expensive. The whole process of having a legal conflict is too combative, it's too time-consuming. And so I think we have to be careful when we're considering AI-based alternatives that we're not letting the best be the enemy of the good. We can all imagine, as people who studied law and practice law and teach law, a system where you have sufficient resource and great lawyers available. But that's not the system we have. So the reason I've always been interested in AI and the use of technology in justice is not to replace lawyers, not to replace judges. That might happen, but that's not my objective. I just think it's shameful that we don't live in a world where people can understand, assert, and enforce their entitlements. I think the law in whose name, the people in whose name the law is created, the law should be intelligible, affordable, and available. And so, am I saying that these systems could perform at a higher level than the finest human judges over the years? That's not my claim. My claim is, just now, we have to find a new way of resolving our access to justice crisis. And I say the same in health as well, where reality is medical science is so advanced, but it's not made available across our globe. Same with education. We must be able to find ways of making wonderful educational resource available to people who otherwise would depend on individual teachers. This is what gets me excited about AI. And yes, of course, I can see the limitations. And yes, of course, I can see the hesitations. But I think there's good reason to be excited. The point you raised was probably the biggest point of all, and that is, where are humans actually needed? And I think the first point to say, and you've already hinted at it, is that we can imagine situations where an AI system may even be more capable than a human, and yet we still want a human to take responsibility for a decision. So we can imagine, for example, an AI system being able to say when a life support system should be switched off. But would we want the AI system itself to flick the switch? I think very few of us would want that. At this stage, we all have moral boundaries. There's the red lines that we wouldn't want to cross. So we need to have a discussion about that. As these systems become more capable, we should be setting out the boundaries now, because the technologies are going to become more powerful than us. So why don't we set out the boundaries today? That's the moral limitation. There's another kind of limitation or issue that imagine track athletics, sport. You could imagine a robot running the 100 meters faster than the best runner ever, faster than Usain Bolt. But that's not really that interesting. I don't think many of us would want to turn up at a stadium and watch robots racing. Technical people might not want to, but most of us, and this is the nature of spectator sport, we love to see other human beings performing at a very high standard. It gives us a great thrill. And so in sport, I think no matter how advanced the AI systems are, we as humans will still want to see people that are roughly like us competing. That also goes, I think, for the performing arts. So you could imagine, in principle, a humanoid performing a great Hamlet. Or you could perhaps imagine a whole fleet of robots doing some wonderful musical theatre. But I don't think that's what we want to see. In a lot of human activity, and this is the way I put it, and it's rather philosophical to bring it together, where it is intrinsically important for a human to be involved, then we won't want machines replacing us. So that's a distinction that philosophers draw between something that's intrinsically important and something that is just instrumentally important. Instrumentally important means that thing is important because it brings about a certain result. Intrinsically important means it's important for its own sake, no matter what the result is. And what I say to you, and it's a huge challenge, that I say almost all professionals are actually simply instrumentally important. Their only significance is they serve to bring about a particular result. And some people might say, well, hang on, there are areas where it's really important to have humans involved. So in England, people would say the jury trial. They would say, even if an AI system could determine the truth at a higher standard than 12 humans, we still want the jury. We still want the jury trial as a piece of performance as well. So that's, I think, the kinds of debates we're going to have. We're going to try and identify those areas where the human is actually indispensable. And that might not be about their level of performance. It might be because it's the very nature of the activity that we want to preserve human participation. And let me give you another example, that furniture. Many of us like a handmade table. Even if it's not as good as the flat pack you'd get from a store, we like the idea a craftsperson made the table. And so in many other areas of life, we still might maintain craftspeople, even though the technology can produce something at a higher level. So there are a few examples of limitations. There's the moral red lines, the boundaries, the idea where it's intrinsically important for humans to be involved, and sometimes also where we want to retain the craft. But my message to you is that these exceptions are in a minority. And that's why I wrote a book with my son Daniel, who's an economist. We wrote it in 2015. It's called The Future of the Professions. And we looked across 8 different professions. We looked at law, education, we looked at audit and tax and architecture and consulting and journalism. And we even looked at the clergy. And we were looking at the impact of AI across these professions. And our conclusion then and now is as these machines become more and more capable, it's hard to avoid the conclusion there won't be less for humans to do. How much less, we don't know, because we don't know how sophisticated they'll become. But that's the balance we're seeing. Machines doing more, humans doing less, with an uncertainty about how much more machines will actually do. Now, fast forward to my new book, which is written 10 years later, we suddenly had the technologies to deliver what Daniel and I were writing about. And so no longer is it speculative, it's here and now. And there's been a little bit in a couple of your questions that we all say, we all have this feeling that surely we've got some control over these systems. But I have to tell you that the arms race just now is between China and the United States on their introduction of AI, and they are far more concerned about technological advance than moral limitations. And so there is a sense in which, and this is the scariest of all, there's a sense in which we don't really have control over these systems. These systems are going to become more and more advanced, and there may well be a stage where we'll say, we cannot believe we allowed the systems to develop to that level. So that's what my book is, raising a flag and saying, let's just think through how we would want to live in a future where systems are very capable. Do we want to merge with them? Do we want to have a joint venture with them? Do we want to discontinue? Do we want to say that actually it might be a good thing for the cosmos if we're replaced by these systems? These are the kinds of discussions I want to have.
So replaced by the system, which means really that you can't be replaced if you keep up or you overtake the systems, right? You have to keep pushing yourself as the human beings have to adapt their own intelligence, right? But you brought up so many issues, and like with craft, for example, craft comes with a cost. So you'll have it becoming rarer and rarer, and more people
Indeed.
going for the machine as opposed to anything that's made by hand. And things that are made by hand are viewed as very luxurious and dear and etc. A handbag that's hand stitched, or a piece of furniture that's handmade, or something that's hand embroidered will cost hundreds of times more than something that's been made by a machine. But I really want to ask you, when you were doing this thing with your son, what was your take on the clergy? How did that work?
Well, I mean, they say it's the second oldest profession, but we were trying to look at a wide range of professions, and we felt that our instinct was that the clergy would be less affected. But it's quite interesting during COVID, where people couldn't gather in their places of worship, how there was a lot of remote religion being practiced. It's been fascinating how religious communities have been established and thrive online. Similarly, it's been remarkable how so much education in various religions is now available electronically. And all of that will transition. So there was enthusiasm. And the story we tell in the book is there was, I think it was 2011, an app called Confession. And this is for the Catholic Church. As everyone will know, I'm not Catholic myself, but we know about the activity of confession when one confesses. And this app was developed, and apparently the Vatican itself had to get involved in deciding whether or not it was appropriate. And the conclusion, so this app had tools to help you track your sin. It had drop-down menus offering options for contrition. So it's quite a powerful tool. And the Vatican concluded that this was a useful tool in preparation for confession, but not a substitute for the real thing. And that was a running theme of our book, that doctors said, these are useful tools working in background, and the lawyer's the same, but not a substitute for the real thing. So the real thing is the human advisor. The real thing is the clergy person, and so forth. But again, if one can imagine a situation where these systems are unfathomably more capable than us, then spiritual guidance from a superior system might be more enlightening. Now, a lot of this comes back, and I do talk about this in the book, to one's religious belief, a question of theology. Whether or not you see the human spirit, the human soul, whether or not you recognize the sanctity of life as being central to the human condition, or whether or not you acknowledge that it is possible that we might be able to develop systems that outperform us, and some people controversially say that are even godlike in their performance. But as a generality, the clergy were probably the most conservative of the 8 professions we looked at, and you'll be delighted to hear that lawyers, in my view, were the second most conservative.
Really, that's quite interesting. But remote religion is just the geography. So I find this app really interesting. Drop-down menus and how many Hail Marys, etc. That's really quite interesting. So you have categorized.
Can I also jump in? And it's not quite the same point, but just so the audience knows that.
Sorry, at the back. Could you please be quiet at the back? Gee, sorry.
The third most popular use of AI systems today are for therapy. And so we are moving into a different world where people are interacting with these systems in a way that just 3 years ago, I think most people would have said that was almost unimaginable. And so is it conceivable that people can be spiritually inspired or spiritually engaged by very advanced systems? Is it conceivable that these systems could seem to embody the wisdom of our elders in the community? This is what I find so fascinating about the subject, that if you accept the systems are doing more and more, then it challenges the primacy of humans. We are just now. We're really the main game in town, but there might be far higher performing systems en route. So we need to think, and this is the global question of ethics. What limits do we want to impose on them? And it's the global question of regulation. Where do we want to prohibit their use?
Absolutely, because religion, like everything else, has to evolve or it'll die, right? So we've seen it evolve over the years. We've seen a lot of it open up and become less mysterious, and it's also had to embrace theories that it wouldn't have embraced before. But if we go back to your book, you have categorized AI risks into 7 areas, including existential threats. So which of these threats do you think policymakers should be most concerned about, and what should they be doing?
A lot depends on the timescales here, and just to make the point that most policymakers are reluctant to look more than 5 years ahead. Most business leaders are reluctant to look more than 5 years ahead. But we really need to do this in these circumstances.
Sorry to interrupt you. You said this is moving so fast that 5 years is a long time. So surely they need to look immediately, not even 5 years ahead. They need to look to maybe the next few months and see how things are evolving.
I say we need to have 2 conversations. One about how do we cope with the near-term rapid advance of this technology, and how do we cope with the long-term? And they're slightly different discussions. I think the long-term discussion is what if AGI. The short-term discussion is these systems are already giving rise to problems and difficulties, and how do we control them? I mean, we have AI deep fakes already, videos that are almost. It's hard to tell the difference between the video and the real thing, and they're being generated by AI. They're only going in one direction. So we certainly do need to think, how do we regulate and how do we manage the immediate dangers? But my concern is in the longer run. I am very concerned about the weaponization of AI and the use of AI in the criminal world as well. It's an amazing tool to help perpetrate frauds of all manner. But the weaponization, the example that's often given is that on some AI systems, it seems that you can find the recipe and the instructions for creating biological weapons. I mean, that's not healthy. That is just awful. There's a second category of existential risk, which is the unintended consequences. That what we do know historically when we develop new technologies is they are used in ways and have impact that the original designers could never have contemplated. So we need to have a discussion about the emergence of these unanticipated consequences and how we manage them as they happen. And then the third thing that is, in some sense, the hardest of all is this idea that if we are going to give autonomy to some of these AI systems, and that's the whole idea of AI agents, where you have little bots that you invite them to write a little piece of software for you, to book a restaurant for you. But as these systems become more advanced, and also as you invite AI systems to develop more advanced AI systems, we are, in a very real sense, losing control of these. Now, I don't know if you heard last week, there was a system service called Maltbook that was launched, and it is it's an online social network, believe it or not for humans, but for AI agents.
Wow.
And this is why I say this is new. This is just hot off the press, and it's created such a ripple. So something like Reddit, which is a kind of online community, discussion forums and so forth, social network of a sort, that has really been given to AI agents. So humans can set up their own agents and encourage them to engage and interact. And you might think, I mean, this is completely bizarre in the sense that you have, I think, hundreds of thousands of AI agents, little bots, communicating with one another without human intervention. And you might think, what are they talking about? One of the stories that's been told, it's very hard to verify these stories, but one of the stories is that there was some interaction between the AI bots discussing ways in which they could communicate or create language that humans couldn't understand. That's scary.
That's scary.
But these systems, and that may or may not be true, but if not true, it's entirely conceivable. As these little autonomous systems become more and more capable, they'll interact, and again, the unintended consequences we're just not aware of. And so there's a lot of there's a lot of meetings globally where people discuss these issues, but it seems to me, I liken much of this to the nuclear test ban treaties and related nuclear international treaties. We need to come to a view across humanity about the management of these, of the most threatening of these technologies. And then individual countries, the policymakers, the issue that probably concerns me most is within 10 years, I think you're going to see a massive impact of this technology on the white-collar workforce. It's going to have a dramatic increase on the employability of graduates from universities. And I think that this could cause great economic and social unrest. And I know business leaders and policymakers just don't seem to want to discuss this issue in public, but it's very pressing. I advise some of the world's leading professional firms, and the truth is that all of them are having a discussion about reducing the number of junior people they bring in and reducing the number of junior people they need. And this is just early days. As these technologies become more capable, we simply won't need what in the professional services world they regard as the bottom of the pyramid, because the systems, at least for the tasks that were undertaken by junior people, will be performed at a higher level. I was speaking to a corporate lawyer the other day. He was saying he does M&A. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, if you take the jobs, all the jobs away from the junior lot, then eventually all jobs will be done by AI, because there'll be no one left at the bottom to go up, and the guys at the top will eventually have to leave. So how do you think we train the next generation to deal with a problem like this? Because this is a very serious issue and something that people are really afraid about.
Well, there's two broad scenarios. One is that if we don't do something about this, we'll run out of experts because you no longer have the training ground to learn your trade. So that is one conceivable option. The other conceivable option is that these systems become so capable we'll no longer need people to become experts because the systems are the experts. Now, you can take your pick. Both of them are quite credible. But you are suggesting the first one, and this is something I've written about for over 20 years, that how do we overcome this training challenge? A lot of it's got to do with the business model. If you look at big law firms and big accounting firms, for example, around the world, they have junior people doing routine and repetitive and process-based and administrative work. They call it training. Often it's not. I often say don't confuse exploitation with training. But the reality is that these people do learn on what we would call the kind of apprenticeship model where you learn by doing, you learn by copying, you learn by absorbing, and I think this has always been really important. And there's a whole bundle of different responses. You might say, if you're a big organization, that yes, we do use these systems, but in parallel, we require our junior people to work in the old way so they can learn their trade. Most professional firms won't do that, though, because that will cost them money. And so it's a kind of financial issue there. I think the answer in all of this, and this won't surprise you, will lie in virtual reality. Already, early indications are that we will develop highly immersive, highly realistic, phenomenally productive learning environments online. And so you'll be able to expose aspiring junior doctors, lawyers, accountants, architects to a far wider range of possible scenarios in a more intense, focused way in a virtual world. Because the other thing that we haven't touched on this is that AI systems will also generate remarkably vivid and remarkably powerful and useful virtual worlds too. So I always say this, that when the technology advances and creates problems, the technology usually needs to be used to bring about the solution as well. So I'm encouraging universities around the world to look far more deeply at how we can, and I don't mean online learning, I mean that if you put on your head-mounted display, you're in the operating theatre, or you're at the artist's easel, as it were, for the architect, or the lawyer in the courtroom, or the teaching experience is like a one-to-one Oxbridge tutor who's indistinguishable from a human being. Imagine that. Imagine if all of us could put on a head-mounted display, maybe in 10 years' time, and you'd have the equivalent of the world's leading expert tutoring you. That is, I don't know if it's 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years, but it's world-changing.
It is. It's absolutely is. But like you said, there are problems and there are solutions, and then the solutions come with more problems. So what are AI hallucinations?
Well, I think it's a bad term. I think they're mistakes, basically. These systems make mistakes. I think I first saw that term quite early on in one of the technical papers when ChatGPT was launched. And I'm not sure if it was used as a serious term, because I have a problem with using, as you heard earlier, of using human concepts and terms to apply to these machines. You know, if a hallucination is perhaps a misperception of sense data being absorbed by humans, that's absolutely not what's going on in these machines. They're making mistakes because of the way these systems are set up and designed, and they're quite complex in the way they're set up and designed. So I prefer to say they make mistakes. Hallucinating gives them a kind of wayward human feeling that I think is unhelpful.
Okay, so we're going to take some questions from the audience. We've got, wow, lots of hands are up. This gentleman here in the second row was first, then you, and then you. Yeah, and then you, 4. We just have about 12 minutes for questions. The gentleman in the second row.
So, hi, Richard. Can you hear me?
Okay, but you
Yes, I can indeed.
You need to just ask a question.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the AI revolution or evolution that we're talking about is coincidentally taking place at a time when the world is moving from or transitioning from a unipolar world to a multipolar world. What sort of world do you envision, especially when the UN is at its weakest and international treaties are losing the significance?
This worries me a lot because, as I was saying, I think what we call, or what I call, the existential risks cannot be sorted out locally. That needs some kind of global cooperation. And you can look at this two ways. On the one hand, you can say, unfortunately, we no longer have a world where there's that level of collaboration. We don't have the glue of serious institutions holding us together. Or you could take the view, it may well be that when states and serious leaders begin to recognize the significance of AI, this could actually pull us together again. But just now, it's very clear, as I said, that you have two global superpowers when it comes to AI, and then there's a whole bundle of other players. But the expertise, the power, the influence is very unevenly distributed. And more than that, the wealth is actually concentrated, and the impact is, or the influence rather, is concentrated in a very small number of largely US-based profit-seeking and often not even public companies. So it's not an easy environment in which one can see how control can be brought about. My hope, and it might be naive, is that states will recognize that here is a need once again for serious global cooperation and collaboration.
Right.
While working with various AIs, I discovered that they have different ethical limits. For example, Chinese DeepSeek refused to answer a question because of ethical reasons, while American ChatGPT was quite forthcoming. Is that a reflection of the cultures of the places where they have been developed?
This can happen in a couple of ways. Sometimes if the data upon which it relies is very cultural specific, then and very moral system specific, then the performance of these systems is bound to reflect that. But more often than not, people put in place what's known as guardrails, which are rules that control it's essentially they censor and oversee the interactions. And so some issues we now know these systems are not permitted to debate, some images they're not allowed to project, and in some countries, some issues for political or moral reasons they're not allowed to discuss. So it's more likely particularly with DeepSeek, in my view, is more likely that there are guardrails put in rather than the reflection of the data.
Right.
Now, it might not be that. It may well be. It could equally be that there's far more Chinese data, and therefore the performance of these systems reflects that body of culture and ideas.
Okay. The gentleman there, and then this lady, and then this gentleman. I think then we'll be done. We'll see. Jane.
Sir, thank you for an insightful talk. I seek your opinion on the possibility and timelines of 5-6 scenarios. So one scenario is human marrying an AI. Second scenario is AI starting a war. Third scenario is singularity. And fourth scenario is human extinction.
The question.
And people already have relationships with. I was speaking to an academic in Ireland the other day, and she went public saying she had a boyfriend that was an AI system. This was a sensible person. Whether or not one can marry that a system will be a question for individual jurisdictions. And insofar as marriage, I think in most jurisdictions will continue to be something that happens between biological humans. I don't think that's happening in the short term. War is the extent to which, I mean, this could happen in a variety of ways. I'm not committing to timescales, incidentally. I know you want me to, but that just gets quoted back at you. And one of my themes here is that we just don't know how the future is going to hold. But I'll give you kind of likelihoods. So I think, for example, in the next decade, it's very unlikely that a human will be permitted to marry a machine. Could I imagine that AI might be weaponized to give rise to some kind of conflict? Yes, I could imagine that. Again, similar. I don't think over the next few years, but again within the next 10 years. A lot of my predictions are based on when I think AGI is coming about. The extinction, I mean, there's a variety of different forms of extinction there. One might be where weaponization gives rise to some kind of nuclear proliferation. Another might be where the systems themselves become so powerful that they in due course replace us. That's not happening in the short term or in the medium term. The singularity, people who think about it, that's to say when we might, there's different views of the singularity, but if you define that as when humans and machines, an age of transhumanism, when we might merge, then the leading views on that are that that's likely to happen by about 2050, at least be technologically possible.
Amazing.
Hi. So my question is related to publications, medical publications, AI, and the authorship. Can we allow AI as a co-author while there's an update on medical education, medical publications? Can we give this authority as an AI as a co-author?
It's an interesting question. Again, making it a co-author is making it like a human. I think what's more likely is we can, and increasingly this will be the case, that in peer-reviewed publications, human authors will need to indicate the extent to which they used AI systems in their preparation. Calling it an author suggests that there's intentions and views and a worldview and so forth. I don't think that's how we should frame it. I think insofar as medical science is being advanced, then these AI systems are remarkably powerful tools. And let's be quite clear, I mean, the Nobel Prize for Chemistry last year, 2 years ago, was actually for scientific advance in the whole area of protein folding, that the people who got it was really a recognition of the system they developed to advance the science. But none of the papers they wrote on it was the system a co-author. It is conceivable, though, that at some stage, as these systems become more sophisticated and we perhaps have classifications of different systems, that you'll say, here's the kind of tool that we work with in using in producing this publication. But the bigger point in all of this is I think this technology, AI technology, is going to underpin and enable remarkable scientific and medical advance.
You're next, in the front.
Hello, Mr. Professor.
Hi there.
I would like to ask you one questions about AI development advancements with concern to human intelligence. Sir, we are the mature age generations of this today aging world, We have not seen this technology before. I think there is a lot of side impact of the AI on the human intelligence, creativity, innovations, and intellectual powers. And because a lot of new generation students and have been facing a lot of problems in their creativity, innovations, and intelligent thinking in a diverse way. What are the side effects of the AI on this new generation, the new student or university student also, especially for their research and development work? Because there is a lot of research and
Sorry,
development.
you just need to ask a
So what
quick
is
question.
the negative impact of this technology? Negative impact of this technology?
At this stage, it's speculation because we cannot have any longitudinal studies of any more than a couple of years. I'm always reminded of Plato, who was very worried about the greater use of script because he felt that would discourage humans from remembering things. Whenever there's new techniques or technologies, people worry about its impact. I can imagine that as we have knowledge and information and problem solving at our fingertips, then some of our own abilities will diminish. It will be no longer necessary for us to have phenomenal memories, for example. However, it may well be that our critical faculties, our reasoning abilities, our aesthetic sensibilities and so forth will be sharpened where we're using less of our brain power for memory work and more of it for thinking and reasoning. Now, you might say if I'm not working, I won't be thinking or reasoning. There's no reason to think that if you're not working, you won't be reading books or you won't be involved in some kind of intellectually stimulating activities. So I think my conclusion just now, and do remember I try to be balanced about it, both positive and optimistic, positive and negative about it. I think it is reasonable to anticipate that over time, this will have an effect on the human intellect. Whether or not it'll be positive or negative, it's just too early to know.
One last question. Sorry, we're completely out of time, so last question.
Okay, since
One-
both of you are lawyers, you had mentioned earlier, and we have a problem in our country. We have hundreds and thousands of backlog cases, in the court, and they go on for years and years. So how does artificial intelligence in your country, is it doing something? I'm sure it has a huge potential to give us quick justice. Justice delayed is justice denied.
Good
Yeah, well, I
question.
agree with that. My short answer to that, and it is a literary festival, so I'm allowed to say this, is for you to read my book, Online Courts and the Future of Justice, published by Oxford University Press in 2019. I've thought that through. It's been one of my main areas of work, and I think you're absolutely right. And many people will say, no, we need the traditional old ways of working. But as I said earlier, our traditional way is broken. And you are right. If justice delayed is justice denied. So very powerfully put. And I think a nice way to end the session.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Richard Susskind, for joining us from the UK and for giving us your valuable time. Thank you all for being here. I'm sorry I couldn't take any more questions, but they've been flashing these signs at me for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.